beautiful for Spain, beautiful for spacious skies, for warm radiant strides. That's great, thank you. More than self, our country loved, and mercy more than life. Oh, America, sweet America, God shed His grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, forever waves of grace, for purple mountains, majesty above the fruited America, oh, America, God shed His grace on thee, and He crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. America, sweet, sweet America, God shed His grace on thee, and He crowned thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. To shining Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. I appreciate that. I tell you, I wake up every morning and I look over the hay fields that we live in out on our farm, and I say, my goodness, what a spectacular view, what a spectacular country, and a community that shows up and supports our local military is really a spectacular gift that we have here in Union County. So thank you for being here this morning. Bear with me, I'm toggling back and forth with my music and my lyrics, so I'm getting pretty good at it, but it takes me just a minute. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the graves of wrath are stored. He has loosed His faithful lightning of His terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountain, to the prairie, to the oceans, wide with love. And bless America, my home sweet home. From the mountain, to the prairie, to the ocean, wide with love. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. Thank you so much. All right, I've got one more this morning that I was back and forth about it, and I said, you know what, it's a song that's just got to be done, so I hope that you enjoy it. If tomorrow all the things were gone I'd worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my husband and my child, I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I proudly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from New York down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say, sing with me if you like. I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. Proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand better stop that. It's actually a beautiful song. You want me to do one more? I'll do one. I'll do it. That's why I love y'all. Well, this song is called Blessed, and it truly, it encompasses being an American, being a Christian, being blessed. I get kissed by the sun each morning, put my feet on a hardwood floor. I get to hear my children laughing down the hall through the bedroom door. Sometimes I sit on my front porch swing, just soaking up the day. I think to myself, this world is a beautiful place. Is a beautiful gift. I have been blessed, and I feel like I've found my way. I thank God for all I've been given. At the end of every day, I have been blessed with so much more than I deserve. To be here with to love them so much it hurts. I have been blessed. I have been blessed. Oh yeah. When I'm singing my kids to sleep, when I feel you holding me, I know I am so blessed, and it feels like I found my way. I thank God for all I've been given. At the end of every day, thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank everybody who come out for today to honor our fallen heroes and veterans. My name is Larry Feltner. I am the incoming commander for Post 153 here at the American Legion. It's a great pleasure to be here. Please forgive me, I was not prepared for this. So I'm going to try to wing this the best I can. But it's a great honor to be here. It's an honor to be the new commander of Post 153 here in Lake Butler. If there's any veterans out here that are not a member, please, you're welcome. Everybody's welcome to join. At this time, if I get everybody to stand, we're going to have the Union County High School JROTC cadets, Tanner Canada and Alicia Love, to raise the flag for us. I can have everybody remain standing, please, for an invocation by our Post 153 chaplain, Gene Gordon.
Before I pray, I want to read a quote to you that was made many years ago. Can you hear me now? I want to read a quote to you that was made many years ago, and it just summarizes in a few words exactly why we're here today. In 1868, Congressman James A. Garfield, who would later become the 20th President of the United States, said these words on Decoration Day at Arlington National Cemetery, which later would become Memorial Day. He was a major general in the Union Army, and he had a front row seat to the suffering and the disease, devastation that those soldiers face. Listen to his words as he spoke. I am oppressed with a sense of the impropriety of uttering words on this occasion. If silence is golden, it must be here beside the graves of these men, whose lives were more significant than speeches and whose death was a poem, the music of which will never be sung. We do not know one promise these men made, one pledge they gave, one word they spoke. But we do know that they summed up and perfected by one supreme act the highest virtues of man and citizens. For love of country, they accepted death and thus resolved all doubts and made immortal their patriotism and their sacrifice. Bow with me as I pray. Our Heavenly Father, we deem this a fitting time to pay our respects to our departed comrades. As we stand with bowed heads in reference to them, let us remember the good deeds they accomplished. It is our responsibility to ensure the sacrifices of millions of men and women who gave their lives for our country are never forgotten. We can never replace them. We can never repay them. But we can always remember them. Father, we cannot reflect on this holiday without also remembering the ultimate example of the perfect sacrifice made by Jesus Christ on the cross. John 15:13 says, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. Those who have died in service to our nation remind us of that truth. May their examples of those who have given their lives in sacrifice inspire in us the selfless love of our Lord Jesus Christ. Forever we thank you for the tremendous freedom we enjoy in America. Amen.
Amen. At this time, we'll be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Hunter Doherty.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we'll have the singing of the national anthem by Sondra Hunt.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight
gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
At this time, on the back of your brochure, I will read the names of the Union County veterans that gave the ultimate sacrifice. Please have a seat. World War I, Neil Langford. World War II, Herman Bryan, Gordon Coffin, Seaver Buck Crawford, John M. Dennison, Jack Dyer, Wilbur McCall, Earl Roden, Dennis E. Roberts, Ernest Roberts. The Korean War, John William Carter, Harley Joe C., Lebanon, Jimmy Nettles, Vietnam, Jesse Diggs, Richard Edward Jr., Charles Geiger, Thomas Moore, Panama, Albert L. Grantham. At this time, we'd like to introduce our guest speaker. I'll have my incoming Vice Commander come up and do the introduction.
Bishop, and I'm the incoming vice. I've never been accused of speaking softly. I need to get closer. Ted, is that what it is? So there's a peanut gallery over here to my left. I'm the incoming vice commander for 2019-2020, and it's a pleasure to be here and get the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker. Before I do that, I want to make a couple of more announcements that we have. There are folks here from the VFW over to my left, your right. And you'll see the poppy flowers that we're wearing. It's a tradition on Memorial Day to wear the poppy. It represents all those who sacrificed and lost their life in service to their country in a time of war. And so they have those available. Many of you are already wearing them. But there's also American flags there. If you want to take one of those are free to be taken and meant to be, if you can, decorate a veteran's grave with it. If you have a loved one that you're going to go visit today. If you're going to make any type of trip like that, go do that, or just place it at your home in honor of a fallen veteran. And I believe the VFW is going to have an open house today from I think 11 to 2. So please participate in that. Today our guest speaker is somebody who you may have heard of before, even if you don't know you've heard of him. Danny McKnight was born in Georgia in 1951. He moved to Florida in 1959 and then was commissioned into the Army through the ROTC program, and he studied ROTC, and he received his college degree from one of the most prestigious and best all-around universities in the entire country. He's a graduate of Florida State University. A few claps, I know I'm in enemy territory, it's okay. We'll stand together. All right. He twice commanded an infantry battalion, and that's something I want to highlight that. Infantry battalions they're the first ones to see combat oftentimes, and they're the ones that get that front row seat to all the devastation of combat. And being the commander is a tremendous responsibility to be the commander of an infantry battalion. Not to say that the higher level infantry units, commands, regiments, and divisions don't necessarily have a lot of responsibility, but the battalion level infantry commander has that direct responsibility for those troops in combat, and is the closest one to them for the ones who are doing the fighting. And so he commanded 4th Battalion, 27th Infantry at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. and he was commander of the 3rd Ranger Battalion, 3rd Battalion, 75th Rangers at Fort Benning, Georgia. Served in combat twice, once in Panama in 1989, and then in Somalia in 1993. He retired in 2002 after 28 years of service. He also has served, in his retirement, he served as a Homeland Security Coordinator or Manager and Advisor with local governments in Florida, and he spent time as a motivational speaker. His time in Somalia, this is what you might be familiar with. If you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, that movie is based off the memoir Streets of Mogadishu, which is Colonel McKnight's memoirs. And it was in Somalia when, in 1993, when he commanded 3rd Ranger Battalion, where he saw combat, received the Purple Heart, received the Bronze Star with a Combat Valor device, and saw some of the very devastating combat. And what you see in that movie probably doesn't do it justice, but it gives some representation to what they went through and what they dealt with. And his personal awards include 3 Legions of Merit, a Bronze Star with Combat Valor, Purple Heart, 6 Meritorious Service Medals, 11 Army Commendation Medals, an Army Achievement Medal, various campaign and service ribbons, and the Combat Infantryman Badge, the Ranger Tab, the Master Parachutist Badge with the Bronze Star, and the Pathfinder Badge. And now Colonel McKnight lives with his wife Linda in Rockledge, Florida, where they enjoy their family and friends. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to introduce Colonel Danny McKnight.
I'm not as tall as he is. Not being very tall is sort of the story of my life, you know. I will tell you that I'm extremely honored and thrilled to be here today with y'all, because this is one of the most important days in the history of our country. And not just this year, not just once a year. It should be every day that we remember all of those that have went before us. And it's a big deal to me, because I'll talk a little bit about some of my guys that I was honored to lead in combat. If you're wondering how I got here because the city manager here talked to another city manager that was in Rockledge, Florida, and that was my brother. So between my brother and your city manager here, I was thrilled to get asked to do this. I really was. Memorial Day is, to me, one of those days that we should never, ever not pay great attention to. And remember all of those that have come before us, and there will be those coming after us that are in places right now today, protecting us, fighting in a foreign country, so that the future of America remains stable. And the most important part of keeping America powerful and stable is our young people. And I would tell you that my wife Linda and I were very blessed. We have 2 granddaughters. One's 5. She thinks she's 12. Her sister is 8. I have a grandson. My daughter is a nurse, and her husband's a deputy sheriff, and he's 9. And then we have a 22-year-old and 27-year-old, so they're on their own. And we have a great-granddaughter that's just about 2 years old. To me, that's one of the most important things that I have to think about every day, because those young people are going to be the future of our country. Amen. And it's our responsibility to make them understand that and learn that. This is what I call a solemn ceremonial day. And it takes place across the greatest nation on the face of the earth, the United States of America. Many words are used on this day, but none better than a simple and powerful words. many have made the ultimate sacrifice. Those that made the ultimate sacrifice have allowed us to be here today. The sacrifice started 75 years ago when our great nation entered into World War II. I was so proud just to hear a moment ago and see the name on your bulletin there of the World War I veteran that paid the ultimate price. We don't seem to remember that World War I was before World War II. And I was so proud to hear that and look at it on the bulletin. D-Day is a day that, as people say, will always live in infamy forever and ever. I've been privileged to serve for some great Americans that I learned from. But I'll tell you a little bit about a very special one. Special to me, and probably by the time I finish saying a few words about him, you'll understand. I met a man who was 17 years old when he made a combat jump on D-Day. He spent 3 tours during the World War II. He decided that he wanted to make that military thing a career. He wanted to make sure that he could continue to do his part. He got out of the Army. He went back so he could finish his education. He came back into the Army through Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia. He then went on to serve. After being in D-Day, he was also in the Korean War 1 time and 3 times in Vietnam. The man is a legend, in my opinion. He is now 95 years old. His name is Lieutenant General, retired, David E. Grange, Jr. He is best known for being one of the greatest Americans that we have ever had. General Grange and I are very, very close. He was a 2-star general in Korea, and I was a young captain. I got there in 1978. He'd already been there for almost a year. But the general has to have an aide. Every general has an aide, because if the general doesn't have an aide, he's not going to go to the right place at the right time and probably not be in the right uniform. That's what our job is. Well, the aide had to go back home because of a family emergency. So the general needed a new aide. 7 people were interviewed. I was one of the 7. And I became the aide for the general in Korea for 9 months. It was an amazing event in my life. General Grange then went back to Fort Benning, Georgia, where he lived there for 2 years and commanded at Fort Benning. When we went back to Fort Benning from Korea, I went with him. And it sort of surprised me that he wanted me to go with him, but he did. And I'll never forget that journey, that when we went from Korea back to the West Coast in California, and then from there, we're going to end up going to Fort Benning. The thing he forgot to tell me was that he had a horse trailer. I had the car with the stupid dog in it. He had the truck with the horse trailer. Think about following in a car a horse trailer, and you're looking at it for about 8 days. Tough 8 days. The general and I, to this day, are always connected. General Grange and I have always remembered our birthdays. General Grange and I have the same birthday of April 9. We won't say which year. He's one of my heroes. I was fortunate enough to learn from him as my mentor. And boy, do we need mentors, that's for sure. And after he did all of that fighting, he did. the one thing that I think we need to remember is we need to ensure the words that have always been written before. Our rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those have been in our country. Those words have existed for a long time, and we need to never forget them. We're still fighting a tough war today. As you know, we have young men and women in Afghanistan still today. They're not doing it just for fun. They're doing it to protect you and I so that we can be sitting here today. And there's nothing more important than remembering them. I believe that we are and always will be prepared and ready to fight the enemy no matter where they are and what they're doing. And we will win every time because we are the United States of America and the greatest military on the face of the earth. A reality that is overlooked, in my opinion, in our nation is the casualties of combat. I think every American should understand what the casualties of combat is really all about. Every one of you sitting here does. You understand it. But we need to make sure that that understanding of the casualties of combat is a big deal. I personally think it should be a great part of the education for our kids growing up. Not starting at 5 or 6, but give them the opportunity to get a little older so that they can learn what you have done and they can learn to follow you. Fighting the fight never goes away. The loss of life of our warfighters never goes away. An effort to support and help one of the most important groups of people are the families. The mom and dad, the brothers and sisters of those that have passed away. Our thoughts and prayers should always go with those family members that have had to go to a national cemetery or a cemetery somewhere and lay that young man or young lady. As you may know, you've heard a little bit about the fact that I was the commander of 3rd Ranger Battalion in Mogadishu, Somalia in 1993. I will say that it was one of the toughest days of my life, without a doubt. The other elements that were there with us were Delta Force operators, aviators from Task Force 160. Task Force 160 has the greatest aviators on the face of the earth. They know how to do it. I was fortunate to serve with those guys. But I also had to serve with my guys. People have asked me before, but boy, that was really a bad day, wasn't it? I said, no, it wasn't a bad day. There's no such thing as a bad day when you're in combat. It's a tough day. Don't we wish that every day when that happens, they could all come home safe and sound? You know, we'd like that to happen, but we know it can't happen. Just listening to the names that were just read a few moments ago, that tells us how important it is that we always reach out to not just those that have fallen, but we need to reach out to their loved ones because they need us and we need them. That tough day in Somalia for me was a day that I will never forget. It is with me forever. But probably the most important part of it to me is I lost 6 of my kids. See, my Rangers were my kids. And they always will be. And I lost 6 over there. It was not the kind of day that I was hoping, because I was hoping we would all be able to walk back to where we started that day. But it was a tough day. Those 6 young men are my heroes. Those 6 young men are Sergeant Lorenzo Ruiz, Corporal James Cavaco, Sergeant Dominic Pila, Sergeant Casey Joyce, Specialist Richard Kowalewski, and Corporal Jamie Smith. Those 6 young men are my heroes. They probably in some way kept me from getting killed. But I'll be honest and tell you the truth. I was in the lead vehicle of a Humvee convoy that day. It's amazing how many people have said, well, why were you in the front right seat of the lead vehicle? And I love it when they say that, because then I look them dead in the eyes and I said, where do you think I should have been? They say, well, we just can't imagine that the battalion commander would be in the lead vehicle. I said, well, this one was. Because I learned it from people like General Grange. I don't know how to lead from the rear. I only know how to lead from the front. And that's what we have out there today. The young men and women that know exactly what they're doing. Linda and I have been making a journey every 5 years since 1993. 1993 was when my 6 guys were killed. And we've made a commitment. We made a commitment to the sacrifice of those 6 young men. And that they will never be forgotten. This past September, we did another journey. It was the 25th year since the first year of 1993. What we do on those 5 years is Linda has found very nice gray rocks. She paints them black, and I sign every one of them. We go on that journey, and we're going to leave a new rock at their gravesite. This past time when we did it in September, we left from where we lived in Orlando, and then on to where Sergeant Lorenzo is buried at the National Cemetery at Fort Bliss, Texas. It's not a beautiful cemetery, probably in most people's eyes, because it's not grass. They don't have good grass out in El Paso. But they have beautiful white pebbles. And it is so amazingly beautiful. So we would visit Sergeant Lorenzo Ruiz's gravesite. We'd leave a new rock. Then we would go on to Rehoboth, Massachusetts. Anybody here ever been in Boston? Well, if you have, you shouldn't have been there. I see a few people shaking their heads, yes. When we left Fort Bliss and we flew to Boston, it was pouring down rain. Pouring down rain. I had to get through 4 tunnels. I didn't know there was that many tunnels you had to go through to get out of Boston. But I found them. We then drove down to Rehoboth, Massachusetts. We actually went to the town of Taunton, which is a little bigger than Rehoboth. So we got there, and it was dark, and it was raining. We went to the cemetery. That cemetery was about 2 times the size of this right here. Not a very large one. Had a dirt trail. Had no lights. We had a little problem finding it that night because of that. Went back to Taunton. Police officer was sitting there in the circle. I got out of the car and I carefully walked over to him. And I said, "Sir, I hate to bother you." He says, "Colonel, it's no bother. What are you doing?" I said, "How do you know me?" He said, "I heard you speak 3 years ago and I haven't forgotten." I said, "Well, thank you." We talked a little bit and he says, "Yep, you just hit that road over there. You'll make it okay." And I said, "All right." And so I said goodbye. I started to get in the car and he said, "Wait just a minute." Then he comes over to me and he said, "I just talked to my police chief. I'm your escort officer the rest of the night." See, sure, if I had a good escort, didn't I? Yeah. So anyway, he escorted us all the way out there that night with his headlights and our headlights so that we could see exactly where the gravesite was. One of those rocks was still there from 5 years ago. There's another one there now for Corporal James Cavaco. Well, he told us goodbye and we left, and Linda, being smarter than me, said, "We've got to get the other side of New York." I said, "You're right about that." So I drove till 1:30 in the morning, got the other side of New York. Because the next day we would be going to Vineland, New Jersey. Sergeant Dominic Pila grew up all the way through high school in Vineland, New Jersey. Sergeant Dominic Pila was my first one killed that day. His parents, Ben and Diane, are just wonderful, wonderful people. His sister and brother. Ben told me one time that I think he got word that I didn't come by and see him. He said, if you ever come by again and do not stop and see me, I will have you killed. Ben said that because he's an Italian, okay? He made that clear to me. So we went to the cemetery with them. Every 5 years we go with them. And if we're even near Vineland, we go and visit with them. I will tell you something special about Sergeant Dominic Pila being the first one that was killed that day. But 25 years after that happened, his sister had been trying to get a school named after her brother, who I think should have deserved that. They couldn't do it very well, and she called me and she says, we had a school board meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. Would you mind flying up here and speaking at the school board meeting? I said, I don't mind at all. I got there and I was talking to her, and she says, now, when do you want to speak? I said, I want to be last. She says, no, you can only talk 3 minutes, though. I said, Jennifer, I don't know what 3 minutes is. I spoke a little long. 9 yeses and 1 no. Sergeant Dominic Pila now has a school named after him. That is what all of our country should be about. Taking care and paying so much to our young men and women. Well, that was the first 3, and I still had 3 to go. The next place we went after Vineland was Arlington National Cemetery. I'm sure quite a few of you have paid homage there. I wish every American would, personally, without question. Our grandchildren that are 5 and 7, 8 and 9, okay, they're going to go. I'm going to make sure, because they need to understand how important it is. That is where Sergeant Casey Joyce is buried, and Ranger Richard Kowalewski. Some people have gone there, and I've actually been asked a few times, why is it that your 2 guys are here and there's another one in between that's not one of your guys? I said, because the one in the middle was a Delta Force operator by the name of Grizz Martin, who was killed in Mogadishu. The Rangers support the Delta Force operator. That's the way we operate. So I try to make people understand how important that is. Well, after we finished there, we had to fly from down to Fort Atlanta, Georgia, get our car, and then drive down to Fort Benning. We got down to Fort Benning that night, and the next day we went to the grave site at the Fort Benning National Cemetery for Corporal Jamie Smith. He was the last one killed that day. That is one of the most important things on the face of the earth for me, is to remember my 6 kids, because they are my kids. Another important thing that a lot of the veterans here, I think, will understand very well. There's a man that's also buried in the Fort Benning Cemetery there. His name is General Hal Moore, one of the greatest Americans I'd ever met in my life. That movie that Mel Gibson plays in and Sam Elliott does, that's one of the most powerful movies I've ever seen. I've had trouble watching it, but I've made it through it a couple of times. Well, when I took command of 3rd Ranger Battalion, I'd been there about 2 months. I wish I'd been there longer, because I had 2 of my best friends, the commander of 1st Ranger Battalion at that time and the commander of 3rd Ranger Battalion, were killed in a helicopter crash. I was pulled out of Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, and asked if I would like to take command of one of the Ranger battalions. It's the greatest privilege and honor I ever had in my life. Both of those guys were two of my best friends. It was just training, folks. But see, training is also important, and it's also challenging. Well, I took command in February the 8th of 1993. A month later, we went to Korea for a 3-week exercise. It was awesome. And I knew that there was a real evaluation going on with me, because I promise you, all those young Rangers that were walking through the snow and up and down the mountains, they were probably saying, I wonder, can he really do it? Because he hadn't been here very long. They forgot that I'd already been in 3rd Ranger Battalion, I'd been in the Ranger Regiment, etc. But I didn't worry about that. But I followed my friends, Ken Stouse and John Keneally. But I wanted to make sure that all of them were never forgotten. I chose to do something that was very challenging for me. And that was, I chose to tell the rest of the story. We always hear the rest of the story that come out, don't we? I chose to write the rest of the story because I wanted every one of my Rangers that fought in Somalia, one of the toughest days that's ever existed, in my opinion, outnumbered unbelievably. I wrote a book called Streets of Mogadishu, subtitled Leadership at its Best, Political Correctness at its Worst. That's me, folks. I did this because I wanted my Rangers to be recognized for the rest of their life. That's one of the main reasons I wrote the book. I would tell you that the book has been a greater journey for Linda and I than we ever imagined in our life. It's been amazing. Wounded Warrior Project has been something that I've had to battle with, I'll be honest with you. I battled with Wounded Warrior Project when they were in Washington, D.C., and they didn't have a clue what they were doing, to put it politely. Because if you sent $1 to them, they were keeping 75 cents of it and getting 25 cents to our wounded warriors. That was unacceptable to me. And I said, I will talk about that as long as they want to be stupid. I was speaking in North Florida recently. Great audience, spoke. Then went down in Daytona Beach, spoke there, and I'm driving out the road. I was driving up the road to go to Fort Benning because I was going to meet some friends there. A Marine who'd never been to Fort Benning. An Army guy who'd never been to Fort Benning. And an Air Force guy who'd never been to Fort Benning. I had to educate them, but I got it done. It's okay. Well, as I was driving up there, I had a phone call driving up I-95. It was a 2-star general, retired. And he said, well, I've heard that you made a few comments about Wounded Warrior Project. I said, you're right. That's me. He said, I understand that. He said, he talked about a few things. He said, I'd really like for you one day to come up to where Wounded Warrior Project is now in Jacksonville, Florida, not in Washington, D.C. anymore. He said, I want you to just come up so that I can see you and we can talk. I said, I'll do that. I'll be there in about 8 days because I got another event coming up in Jacksonville. I'll be there. He and I talked for a little over 2 hours. I walked away from there a very happy and proud person because the general listened to me. And then he says that every dollar that goes out to our Wounded Warrior Project, Wounded Warriors, now 75 cents goes to them, through them. He said, but I'm not through. He says, I know I want 10 more cents out of it so that 85 cents goes to our Wounded Warriors. That has been one of my goals for a long time. And I'm so proud of the general and what he's chose to do. And they have a tremendous program now. And anytime you happen to see a wounded warrior, don't be afraid to walk up and say something to them. They'll be okay with it. I think sometimes people are a little scared of that. I don't think our kids should be as afraid of it either. When we get them to the right age, it's important. They need to understand the history. That all of you veterans here, made it so people like me could follow you. I don't know for sure if I lived up to what you expected of me. But I promise you, I gave it everything I had. God bless you. God bless America.
I don't know if I can follow that, but I'd like to thank the Colonel for taking his time out to be here with us today and for that great speech. At this time, we're going to place the wreath at the monument. If I can get Mr. Lee and Shad and Quentin Bloodsworth to please move over to the wreath.
Please join me in prayer. Almighty God, Father of all mankind, Judge over nations, we pray for those that have served, keep and guard the public welfare. That by blessing them, they may be able to enable to discharge their duties honestly and well. We pray for our comrades that by thy help they may observe the strictest judgment, keep alive the fighters of freedom, strive earnestly for the spirit of democracy, and preserve untarnished our loyalty to our country and to thee. Finally, O God of mercy, we ask thy blessing and comfort for those comrades who are suffering mental and physical disability. Cheer them and their families. We give you praise and glory in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Once again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today, taking the time to be here with us to honor all of our fallen heroes. At this time, we're going to have the playing of taps, and that will conclude our ceremony. Thank you. Once again, thank you all for being here. That'll conclude our ceremony today.